That is when I knew whatever it was out there was waiting for its chance to strike. What was your scariest paranormal experience? Let me know down in the comments below, because today we're going to talk about something that was witnessed on camera, but not by any ordinary person. This is a true horror story. The year before, I had just finished my training as a security guard and gotten my first job at a private security company. He was also extremely close to the edge of the property line. He've been standing here for 10 minutes and hasn't moved. I didn't want to tell them it was on camera, because I was unsure if they do believe me. So I just described the man as best I could. He put his hands up and took a step toward the camera. I hit the floor. Was he seeing me? Did he know I was watching him? When it was almost 5 a.m., I decided I needed some coffee. So I left the booth and went to the little kitchen area to make myself a cup. I tried calling dispatch again, but they still weren't answering. Bah! And the knocking continued for another minute or two, until I threw my phone on the desk and buried my head in my hands. Finally it stopped. I must have spaced out or something, because I remembered the whole time clearly. But it was 6 a.m., and I had been watching him for 5 hours. I didn't move. I didn't blink. How was that possible? Also, make sure to share this with your friends, so we can spread the word about unsolved mysteries like this one. We've got lots more on the way, so stick around. As I walked in, I heard the door to the office open and shut. I never did find out who that man was or what he wanted. And to this day, I still wonder what I would have done if he didn't leave. David, would I have kept watching him all day? Would he have eventually come in and tried to hurt me? Or was he watching me the whole time? The sun was coming up now, so I decided I was going to take a break and walk around a little bit. As I was walking, I looked out the window and I saw a set of footprints in the wet cement. I ran to the front of the building to see if I could see where they led, but I couldn't. They just disappeared. I walked back to the office, and that's when I noticed that the door was open again. I closed it and locked it. Then I went back to the camera monitor. I thought it was weird because I was the only one on duty, and no one else had a key. So I grabbed the coffee and walked back to the booth to check the cameras again. Then he stopped and slowly turned his head toward the camera. I slammed the window shut and backed away from it, but he was still there and he wasn't moving. He just stood there staring in the window. I don't know how long we stared at each other like that, but it felt like forever. Then he slowly reached out and knocked on the window. I wish I was joking. I wish I was making this up. But as soon as our eyes met through the camera lens, I knew whatever it was out there was waiting for its chance to strike. I don't want to scare you with too many details, but the look on his face was evil. Pure evil. After giving them a description, I asked the dispatcher if they wanted me to come in. I was trying to intimidate him somehow, and he stopped and started backing away. I felt like I was in a horror movie, and the score started swelling and you could hear the violins. I think I screamed for about 30 seconds straight, until he was almost at the corner of the building. Then he disappeared from view and make a statement. Or if they wanted me to keep an eye on him until morning. She told me to stay where you, Ria, and we, LL, have someone there as soon as they can. And he responded, looks like a drug deal gone wrong. That guy's most likely dead, and that's his body. No, That's a pretty dark thing to say. But I reassured him that the guy was breathing. In fact, I could even see his chest rise and fall. My friend still insisted it was a dead body and told me I should let dispatch know. So I decided to call them. I could see his feet were on the sidewalk and his body was kind of hanging off onto our property. If he fell, he'd fall on our side. And then I noticed something that made the hair on my arms stand up. The man had stopped breathing. Okay, now I'm definitely freaked out. What do I do? I tried calling dispatch again, but they weren't answering. Maybe they were busy. I don't know. So I got back on the camera. I knew it wasn't a homeless person because they wouldn't stand right here. They'd go behind the building or something and sleep in a spot that was UN, right next to a security camera. I was getting creeped out, but it was still somewhat funny. So I pulled up my phone and recorded a video of the monitor. I was gone. I sent it to my friend, who was a deputy at the local sheriff's department, and see what he thought. One of our accounts required us to have a guard sit in a booth right outside the property line and monitor the cameras. Normally this would be a great assignment, but this particular account was hell. First of all, the client was super paranoid and always on my back about something I didn't do or some rule I broke, which I hadn't done. He would call so often. It was impossible to even enjoy my coffee break without him calling and harassing me. Second, the actual site was like the middle of nowhere. It was a warehouse district, and nothing ever happened, which was great. But the boredom would get to me after a while, and finally, there was no one else around. I was always alone, sitting in this booth, listening to police scanner traffic and watching these cameras for hours on end. One night I was working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, which is normally boring as heck. So I was actually sitting there typing up reports from incidents that had happened earlier in the week when I saw it. Someone was standing at the edge of the property line, just staring into the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a delivery driver because they were just standing still. And we had deliveries scheduled for 11 and 11:30. I went over to the camera where it was, and sure enough, there was a guy in a hat and a jacket just standing there, not moving at all. I could see the outline of his body through the window of the truck, but his face was blocked by the hood of his jacket. Then he turned and I could see his face, or what I assumed was his face. It looked human, but I couldn't tell because it was dark and he wasn't making any movements. His head was just facing forward. Then I started to get a little freaked out, because usually if a delivery driver was waiting, they would move around a little bit, maybe smoke a cigarette or stretch or something. When I sent the video, I said, "Look at this dude." I called and explained what I had seen. As I waited, I kept checking the cameras and recording. It was about 5 minutes later when the man suddenly started moving. So I started yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs. Of course, I called dispatch again, but they still weren't answering. So I sat there watching the monitor, waiting for the sun to come up, and I saw him standing right outside the window looking in. Now I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. When I looked up, I saw that he was gone. He was gone. But when I checked the time, I realized that I hadn't blinked. I watched him the whole time he was there. Well, the rest of my shift passed without incident. The sun came up and everything seemed normal. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more content. I know it was real because I can still feel the cold spot. Some places are just cursed. I knew I should have listened to my gut and stayed away. I could still hear him screaming in my head, even though he'd been gone for over a month. Then I started hearing whispers coming from the walls. I could have sworn I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just the pipes, but it didn't help the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Good thing I did, because that night I heard scratching at the door again. And this time I could hear what sounded like muffled voices trying to get in. In the morning, I got up and called a priest. They sounded desperate, like whoever was out there needed to get inside badly. At first, they were just voices I couldn't understand, but then I started to make out the words. Let me in, please. Let me in, please. Let me in. He came and performed an exorcism ritual, and then things got really weird. Maybe it was just kids playing a prank. Maybe I was just imagining things. I got up and cautiously opened the door. Outside was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. Sunlight streamed through the clouds. Birds tweeted merrily in the trees. But the air grew cold as it glided toward the hut, still dangling from the tree branch. Now it's your turn, it hissed. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I screamed and scrambled back, tripping over the roots. It towered over me, its sharp teeth bared in a menacing snarl. With a swift movement, it snatched the heart out of the air and devoured it in one gulp. Adrenaline surged through my veins, giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my clothes. As I sped away from the house, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There it was, standing at the edge of the woods, its eyes fixed on me. I explained everything to them. The whispers, the scratches, Brew, the voice in the peephole, and finally what I'd seen in the woods. I knew what he meant. The police had come, but there was nothing they could do. The reality of my fate crashed down on me. I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. I'd seen enough evidence with my own eyes, heard enough whispers in the dead of night. They'd never believe me. B listened patiently, their expressions grave. Terror gripped me. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and didn't stop driving until I reached a motel several hours away. The creature didn't follow. Pile. My body trembling, listening for any sign of pursuit. Silence. Finally, I forced myself to stand and slowly made my way back to the house. Thorns scratched and ripped at my arms and legs, but I didn't dare slow down. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I'd witnessed. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my sanity? I needed to get away, to escape the horrors that seemed to be closing in around me. I threw the bag on the floor and sank down on the bed, tears streaming down my face. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I need your help, I cried into the receiver. There's something evil haunting me. The operator's voice was calm and reassuring. Tell me where you are and I'll send someone right away. I gave her the address of the house and waited anxiously for help to arrive. Behind me, I heard the creature thrashing in the underbrush, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. I dared not look back. With a primal scream, I lashed out, connecting with its chest. It stumbled back, surprised by my sudden attack. But there was no one there, and as I scanned the yard, I saw a big gash where the tree had been. It must have fallen during the storm last night. I thought, relieved that whatever had been outside my door was gone. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors. Not a sound disturbed the peaceful scene. But burr. Then one night I heard the voice right outside my door. Let me in, it whispered urgently. Please let me in. My blood ran cold. I peered through the peephole and saw nothing. But then I heard heavy scratching and the distinct sound of splintering wood. Whoever was outside my door was trying to break in. I barricaded myself in the bathroom and called the police. They found nothing. But when they were gone, I heard the whispers again. I tried to distract myself by going to bed early, but that didn't work. But 2 weeks later, they started again. I heard chains dragging metal moans. I shut off the lights, hoping that if it was just my imagination, I wouldn't be able to see whatever it was. That worked for a while, but then the scraping started again. I gasped as I realized what it was. A human heart. Brute. As I reached out to touch it, the skin split open and something crawled out. I screamed and fell back. The creature opened its mouth and spoke. You shouldn't have ignored me, it rasped. This time it sounded like someone dragging themselves closer and closer to my bedroom door. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the creature took a step forward. Its eyes glowed red in the daylight. The sight sent shivers down my spine. Fear paralyzed me. I couldn't move or speak. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were filled with lead. I tossed and turned for hours until finally, exhausted, I fell asleep. The day I moved into the house, I felt something watching me. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I get that feeling all the time, so I just shrugged it off and kept unpacking. The place had been empty for years, hence the low price. I needed to go to the store anyway, so I figured I would just stay out of the house until I could get some repairs done. As soon as I stepped out the front door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. So I just shook it off and walked to my car, so I couldn't complain. As far as I know, no one had lived there since 1974. No wonder it felt empty. As the sun went down, I made myself dinner and watched some TV. In the morning, I got up and made coffee. On my way home, I stopped by a hardware store and bought a lock for the front door. So I left town for a few days and stayed with a friend. When I came back, the whispers had stopped. I have no idea how long I sat there frozen in fear, but eventually the noise stopped and I fell asleep. It was like a week after he left that I noticed the whispers seemed to be coming from outside my door. I asked a few neighbors if they had kids playing outside, but they all looked at me strangely and said, "What?" And just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the whispers stopped. I stepped outside and looked around, half expecting to find someone lying at my feet. Then I looked up and saw something hanging from the tree. My breath hitched in my throat. It lurched toward me, its arms outstretched. Ooh. I shut my eyes tight, bracing for impact. Instead of crushing me, it brushed past me. Then it turned back to face me, its eyes burning into mine. Oh. I struggled to my feet, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Seizing the opportunity, I turned and ran. I burst through the tree line and collapsed on the other side, gasping for breath. Each step I took echoed the creature's mocking laughter. I packed a bag, grabbed my car keys, and fled. Safe at last in my room, I locked the door and bolted the window. Within minutes, 2 police officers were at my door. I opened it, and they entered the room. "We'll go check it out," one of them said, "but I don't think we'll find anything." With heavy hearts, they left me alone once again. Every single night at exactly 3 a.m., my motion sensor lights would turn on. They were brand new, and this was the first time ever that they had been set on. I looked out the window and saw what I think was a shadow on the lawn. Because it was gone almost instantly. Did I imagine it? Maybe. But the next night it happened again, and the night after that, same thing. And then one night, it actually walked into view. That's when things really started to get creepy. We couldn't see anything from where we were sitting, but we knew that whatever had triggered it must have come from the street. It was a brand new sensor, so we doubted that that was the problem. But just to be sure, we replaced them anyway. Every morning when I got out of bed, my phone would be completely drained of battery. It never died faster than that before, and every morning it would be pushed away from the wall, as if someone had been sitting on the bed and testing its connection. Then the nightmares started. As the days went on, the interruptions became more frequent. I went to look outside, but I couldn't see anything. I peeked over the couch and saw what looked like a shadow on the lawn. It was gone almost instantly. I told my boyfriend. It happened again. The motion sensor turned on, and a shadow appeared on the lawn. It was definitely there because I could see the wind blowing through the trees and ruffling its edges. I nudged my boyfriend, but he just rolled over and buried his face deeper in the pillow. Then the shadow started walking toward the house. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, the covers tangled around my legs. I stared at the ceiling, trying to count sheep, but they kept turning into shadowy figures. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it standing at the edge of my vision, tall and thin, breathing shallowly through a straw. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him awake, but it was too late. Whatever it was had vanished. I could still see the imprint of the figure on the grass, like a negative in an old-fashioned photograph. Then it was gone. I went back to bed, hoping to finally get some sleep. But as soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard footsteps outside. I got up and went to the window. I could feel my blood run cold as I watched the tall, thin figure approach the house once more. But he was fast asleep. I figured that I had just imagined it. You can find whatever it is that you're looking for. Because, for me, I'm afraid that it's never going to end. It happened again, and this time I paid closer attention. It was walking slowly, methodically across the yard, heading straight for the front door. As it approached, I could make out a shape. It was tall and thin, almost like a scarecrow. Then it stopped right outside the door. I could hear it breathing, raspy and shallow, like air being sucked through a straw. I backed away, tripping over the coffee table. My boyfriend and I huddled in the corner, watching the door. It knocked 3 times. Then we heard footsteps running away from the house. The thumping must have been from the same animal that had triggered the motion sensor so many times. My boyfriend and weeks had passed, and we were starting to think that we had finally gotten some peace when it happened again. Aha! The motion sensor turned on, and a shadow appeared on the lawn. It was definitely there because I could see the wind blowing through the trees and ruffling its edges. I nudged my boyfriend, but he just rolled over and buried his face deeper in the pillow. Then the shadow started walking toward the house. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him awake, but it was too late. Whatever it was had vanished. I started taking turns sleeping on the couch downstairs so that if whatever it was came back, one of us could keep an eye out. At first, it was once or twice a day, but soon it was several times an hour. But I knew that something was wrong. These weren't just dreams. It sounded like someone or something heavy jumping up and down on the grass. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to fall back asleep, but it kept getting louder. We checked the security footage and saw the same tall, thin figure approaching the house. But as it neared the door, the feed cut out. It was almost as if it had cut out the power to the camera. After that, the interruptions stopped. It was like whatever it was had finally moved on. Eventually, it came to a stop, and I heard footsteps near my bedroom window. I stayed perfectly still, hoping that whatever was out there would move on. Whoever or whatever it was stopped walking around and stood perfectly still outside the window for what felt like hours. Then it was silent. I could feel the presence watching me, even when I was awake. My boyfriend and I tried everything to figure out what it was, but nothing worked. The only thing that stopped the interruptions was covering the motion sensor with a blanket. There was no way that a branch could have done that. So we got in the car and drove down the street. We didn't find anything unusual except for Mrs. Henderson's new swing set. In one dream, I was standing in the backyard, and I could feel someone staring at me. When I turned to look, I saw a man standing at the edge of the trees, but when I turned back, he was gone. In another dream, I was lying in my bed with my boyfriend, and I could feel him watching me as I slept. I turned to face him, but his eyes were blank, soulless, black pits. And when I reached out to touch him, he just kept staring back lifelessly. I woke up shaking after that one. We asked her if she had seen anything strange the night before, but she said that she hadn't. She was an elderly woman who spent most of her days tending to her garden. She said that she definitely would have noticed something big enough to trigger the motion sensor. It all started a few weeks ago. My boyfriend and I had just bought our first home together, and we were finally starting to unpack. My boyfriend was sprawled on the couch, while I was sitting on the floor putting away some kitchen supplies. The motion sensor was going off every 10 minutes like clockwork. I looked out the window, but there was nothing there. I told my boyfriend about it, and he said that he was pretty sure that it was just a branch from the tree hitting the sensor. My dog started barking at the window, so I quickly closed the blinds. My boyfriend and I continued watching TV until we eventually fell asleep. I could hear him getting more and more comfortable by the second. Then I heard the distinct worry sound of the motion sensor outside. I figured that it must have picked up his movement through the window, and he must have just walked within its range. He hadn't gotten up, so I went back to organizing. We lived in a large city, but in a neighborhood that felt pretty secluded. There were trees everywhere, and even though it was summer, the sun set early and left us in darkness most of the year. So, the seller had installed motion sensor lights around the property, and I found them pretty useful. We were exhausted from a week of unpacking, so we decided to order takeout and watch Netflix. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. The next morning after. Of course, not sleeping at all, we went out back to check the motion sensor. When we returned home, we tested the sensor to see if it needed new batteries, on top of the sensor being set off frequently. Other strange things started happening. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, with the feeling that someone was watching me the whole time. My boyfriend said that I had been talking in my sleep and that I probably just dreamed that he was there. One night, I was woken up to loud thumping, coming from the backyard. I sat in bed, listening intently. In the morning, it was during one of these nights that I was awoken by the now familiar worry sound. The next night, the next day, that night. In the morning, I got up and went to the window. I hope that whoever you are,